Come in. Oh, hello. Nice to see you. Do come in. Oh, come over here. I'll have your usual seat. There's a copy of the Church Times on it, but that's actually apropos because I want to read you something. I'll just close the door. Well, welcome. Nice of you to pop in again. It's a really dreich day out there. It's cold and wet and miserable. Just the sort of day to be inside in the warmth and with a pipe and a cup of coffee and a book. But now I just moved the Church Times, rather moving photo on the cover of 1,000 Days of the Ukraine War and candles being lit to remember those who've died. November being very much the month of remembrance. But yesterday, the 22nd, was another day of kind of double remembrance. It was, on the one hand, as it always is, of course, St. Cecilia's Day, and people who love music often go to concerts on that evening, and of course there are great pieces of music written in honour of St. Cecilia. I've even written a brief ode to St. Cecilia myself, which was set to music by the composer Jack Redford. But it is also, for those of us that love the Inklings, and particularly those of us who love CS Lewis, it's a day when we remember him because it's the anniversary of his death. He died on November the 22nd, 1963, the same day as it happened that both Kennedy and Aldous Huxley died, and of course because the Kennedy assassination was such total and terrible news, nobody noticed the other two had gone, as it were. It took some weeks before people even to realise that C.S. Lewis had, slipped his moorings in the night and sailed out of this world in his own way on a kind of dawn treader. But now we remember and we think about him. So I'd been thinking about the coincidence of those 2 days, St. Cecilia and Lewis, and I was prompted to do so. I went to Belfast for a C.S. Lewis conference earlier this month, and a series of papers, but one of them was a real eye-opener. It was a paper by a young musicologist. She's actually a graduate student from Cambridge, called Sophie Jones, in which she drew attention to what's said about music as opposed to noise, and music and silence as opposed in the screw tape letters. But that set me thinking about music and Lewis, and so I wrote a little piece mentioning her paper, but some other of my own reflections in my Poets' Corner column. And I thought, as we're just very close to that Lewis anniversary, I'd read it to you. Of course, the constraints of my pieces is between 500 and 600 words, so you can only hint and suggest. And I quote a little bit of one of the Narnia books in this, and I thought it might be nice after I've read you this to read a little bit of Lewis together. So I tend to read to you from quite old books. This is probably the most recent thing I've ever read to you because this paper came out yesterday and you happened to drop by today. So Poets' Corner. Malcolm Guite reflects on C.S. Lewis's love of music and on the anniversary of his death. So this is what I wrote. For me, the 22nd of November is an especially resonant day. It is St. Cecilia's Day, so naturally one meditates on music. And it is also the anniversary of C.S. Lewis's death. So a day to remember that great soul, that kindler of the imagination for Christ. Lewis was famously rude about a lot of church hymnody, which he dismissed as, quote, fifth-rate poems set to sixth-rate music. And that might even be true of some of the fare that was served up in his day. But in fact, he had a real ear for music and a deep delight in it. He came to love Wagner as a young man, chiefly the Ring Cycle, as part of his obsession with Norse mythology. Something of the beauty, mystery, and yearning of the legends and their attendant music was what sustained him spiritually through the years of his atheism, until he found in Christ the true source of the piercing and yet joyful longing which that potent mix of music and mythology had stirred in him. It is true that he was careful thereafter to emphasize that it was not the music or the books themselves, but something coming through them that was the truly spiritual element. And he was wary of falling into any kind of aesthetic idolatry, something he had been prone to in his undergraduate days. So he says, self-admonishingly, in The Weight of Glory, "The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them, it only came through them, and what came through them was longing. For they are not the thing itself, they are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never visited." And you see there, the tune still continues, the echo of a tune. And yet, for all that caution, Lewis's appreciation of music became more and more deeply grounded in his theology. In The Magician's Nephew, the creation of Narnia is brought about by song and music. Quote, "The lion was pacing to and fro about that empty land and singing his new song. It was softer and more lilting than the song by which he had called up the stars and the sun, a gentle rippling music. And as he walked and sang, the valley grew green with grass. It spread out from the lion like a pool." Love that passage. But perhaps the best and least expected place in which Lewis reveals his deepest thoughts about music is in the Screwtape Letters. At a recent Lewis conference in Belfast, the musicologist Sophie Jones drew our attention to the passage in which Screwtape rants against the two heavenly qualities of music and silence. So Screwtape, talking about the house to which the man is coming because of his girlfriend, says, "The house bears a sickening resemblance to the description one human writer made of heaven, quote, the region where there is only life and therefore all that is not music is silence." Screwtape speaking. Of course, everybody is happy to point out that all that is not music is silence is in fact a quotation from George MacDonald. That's the human writer. So Screwtape's means of countering heavenly music and heavenly silence is, of course, mere noise. Here's another quote from Screwtape that Sophie gave us. "Music and silence, how I detest them both. Hell has been occupied by noise, the grand dynamism, the audible expression of all that is exultant, ruthless and virile. Noise which alone defends us from silly qualms, despairing scruples and impossible desires. We will make the whole universe a noise in the end. The melodies and silences of heaven will be shouted down in the end," says Screwtape. And I add at my final comment in the piece, alas, if Lewis spent a day or two with us now, he might conclude that hell had made considerable progress. So that's my little piece. But even as I was writing it, I thought, gosh, I must revisit those chapters in The Magician's Nephew, from which I quoted almost from memory. Now, I quoted the passage where Aslan is singing the land and the fields and the pools and the thing. But there's an earlier passage where you first hear the song, which is the beginning of the creation of Narnia ex nihilo. And it's all done by music and song. And I think this is really, really fine writing. So perhaps let's finish with this. They've all suddenly found themselves out of the wood between the worlds, and they're in this new land of which there is nothing. They're standing, as it were, in a void on some platform. And there's a cabbie. There's a wonderful Cockney cabbie from London that's been caught up in the magic and is there with him with his horse. And then there's the wicked Uncle Andrew and the witch. And then there's the two children, Polly and Diggory. In the darkness, something was happening at last. A voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Diggory found it hard to decide from what direction it was coming. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions at once. Sometimes he almost thought it was coming out of the earth beneath them. Its lower notes were deep enough to be the voice of the earth herself. Ah, das Lieder von der Erde. There were no words. There was hardly even a tune. But it was, beyond comparison, the most beautiful noise they had ever heard. It was so beautiful he could hardly bear it. The horse seemed to like it too. He gave the sort of whinny a horse would give if, after years of being a cab horse, it found itself back in the old field where it had played as a foal, and saw someone whom it remembered and loved coming across the field to bring it a lump of sugar. "Gold," said the cabbie. "Ain't it lovely?" Then two wonders happened at the same moment. One was that the voice was suddenly joined by other voices, more voices than you could possibly count. They were in harmony with it, but far higher up the scale, cold, tingling, silvery voices. The second wonder was that the blackness overhead, all at once, was blazing with stars. They didn't come out gently, one by one, as they do on a summer evening. One moment there had been nothing but darkness. The next moment, 1,000,000 points of light leapt up, single stars, constellations and planets, brighter and bigger than any in our world. There were no clouds. The new stars and the new voices began at exactly the same time. If you had seen and heard it, as Diggory did, you would have felt quite certain that it was the stars themselves which were singing, and that it was the first voice, the deep one, which had made them appear and made them sing. "Glory be," said the cabbie. "I'd have been a better man all my life if I'd known there were things like this." That's one of the great moments in the Narnia. The children and the cabbie get it. The sophisticated magicians don't get it at all. But the response of the cabbie, "If I'd have known there were things like, I'd have been a better man," the sense that beauty calls out goodness. There's some deep link between beauty and goodness. Beauty makes you want to be good, and you find an inner correspondence. It's like the word fair in English, meaning both beautiful and just. There's a sense in which there's something ugly about injustice. I'd have been a better man. It's a wonderful primal response to beauty. But there it is. We're having a world which is sung into being. And of course, that's a very old idea. I mean, it has some biblical roots in Job lines about the sons of the morning, singing together or shouting together for joy. It has deep roots in the idea of the music of the spheres. And Lewis is drawing on all of those, but he's making something new with it. And so I don't think it's a bad thing that he himself leaves this world and is ushered at last into the true ringing music of heaven on St. Cecilia's Day. Anyway, we're just a day past it, but I think we can still keep the feast. So happy St. Cecilia's Day, and a lovely day to remember both music and CS Lewis. Cheers.